Chapter 56 of the Principles of Economics with Applications to Practical Problems. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shayna. The Principles of Economics with Applications to Practical Problems by Albert Fetter. Chapter 56. Public Policy as to Control of Industry. Section 1. State Regulation of Corporate Industry. Number 1. The great increase of late in the number of industries under corporate control has brought new problems of social regulation. Inventions, machinery, better transportation, better communication, widening markets have united to favor large-scale production, and this in turn to multiply corporations. Corporate organization makes possible greater massing of capital, greater stability of policy, and, because not dependent on a single life, greater permanence than does individual ownership. With these advantages, the corporation brings also new social problems. The relations in corporate business are more complex than those in individual enterprise. The ordinary stockholder cannot have personal knowledge of the business or exercise personal supervision over his investment. The corporate official controls chiefly not his own wealth, but the wealth of others. When men deal personally with each other, their sympathies are more appealed to. But, as noted in the case of the railroad, the corporate official at best seeks to satisfy his employers, often to the detriment both of the employees and of the public. Corporations are soulless because they permit less of the close personal relation that makes for morality. At various points in these later chapters on the relation of the state to industry, mention has been made of the measures society has taken to regulate corporate industry. The purpose now is to survey the field more systematically and to see the extent of this regulation, the difficulties arising, and the principles involved. Number 2. Numerous laws and commissions recently have been established to provide public regulation of industry. The Interstate Commerce Commission is the most prominent of the agencies for regulating corporate industry, as the railroad problem is the most prominent of the corporation questions. But before the advent of the railroad, banks had been recognized as having an exceptional public character. Not only stockholders, investors, depositors, and note holders, but a large part of the public suffers losses by the failure of banks. As investigation by the various interested persons is quite impossible, the state through its agents inspects the books of the bank in a manner not thought of in the case of ordinary private business. The bank commission is the eye of the public, safeguarding the public welfare. State inspection of insurance companies, a later kind of corporate enterprise, grew out of a similar need. Insurance to provide for sickness, old age, or death is socially desirable and is possible in an equitable way only by the association of a large number of policyholders. But inspection of the business by each policyholder being impossible, regulation and control through some public agency is needed. The tax commission now found in a majority of the states have been created principally to deal with corporations. In California, a debris commission regulates the relations between the farmers and the miners using hydraulic processes. A number of states have mining commissions, harbor commissions, labor commissions, boards of arbitration, and other similar bodies. The increase of these public agencies to regulate corporate industry has lately been condemned by some as a useless multiplication of state machinery. Doubtless, some commissions have, through improper influences, been needlessly created. Others, having important duties, have been entrusted to incompetent political appointees. But most of these commissions are needed, though at first their work may be ineffective. Number 3. There is a strong and increasing demand for publicity in the business of the ordinary corporation as a protection to investors. The law has looked upon corporations, with few exceptions, as private businesses having the right to keep every detail of their management secret from their rivals. The inner management, therefore, has been closely hidden from most of the stockholders, who, in economic analysis, are in the main the enterprisers. More and more the business and capital of the country has thus come into control of the few. The ordinary investor in corporate stock buys a pig in a poke and trusts to the integrity of officers working behind closed doors, responsible to no one, too often speculating in the stock of their own companies. The unearned gains thus secured have tainted with dishonesty many a large fortune. No small part of the evil is the closing of the avenues of safe investments to the small capitalist, giving to a favored few a measure of monopoly in investments yielding large returns. Only recently has it been recognized that no large corporation can now be a private business in the old sense. The evolution of industry has left investors and shareholders without protection in advance of a wrong, and usually without legal redress when a wrong has been committed. The demand for some remedy for a condition whose seriousness has been steadily increasing has not come so much from radical quarters as from business and financial circles. In England, some of the worst abuses have been corrected by legislation. In 1900, a bill was drafted at the suggestion of Theodore Roosevelt, then governor of New York, which aimed eventually to make the corporation a quasi-public institution open to inspection. The organizers of a company voluntarily accepting the act were to be personally responsible for the statements in its prospectus. Its issue of stock was to be limited to actual investment and to be publicly made. Its office and records were to be open to inspection. Though public opinion was not ready for this bill, and it failed of passage, the Bureau of Corporations of the new Department of Commerce of the federal government, established in 1903 under President Roosevelt, may be looked upon as a fruit of this initial attempt. Number 4. Greater publicity of corporation business is essential in the interest of the public. With the interest of the investor are usually united more general public interest, but in many cases the two groups of interest conflict. Some persons favor control of corporations only to the degree needed to protect investors, but others place the policy on broader social grounds. The ability of a manufacturing corporation at times by threats of removal to coerce unfair terms from the community, from its employees, and from those who supply it with materials has led to the proposal that factories shall be forbidden to change their location without the consent of the state. Especially does it seem desirable, if it is possible, to preserve the benefits of competition by forbidding rates and agreements in restraint of trade. The old English idea, inherited in our law, is that the highest price that can be got in an open market under ordinary conditions is in general a just price. The control of any line of industry by a few corporations makes secret agreement much more easy, and thus replaces a general market price by a discriminating rate, the highest that each individual will bear. A trust price might still be a reasonable one if the seller met competition in every market, but it is not reasonable when opposition is crushed by local and by individual discriminations. The methods by which this result is obtained shrink from the public gaze. They include secret agreements with railroad agents, a system of espionage on the business of competitors, secret special rates to the competitors' customers, to say nothing more of a corrupt political influence. Publicity in corporation accounts is the first condition to a public and uniform price. The need thus to develop potential competition is especially strong where a monopoly in a natural product exists. A more general recognition of the public nature of corporations will lead to further legislation and to the appointment of corporation commissions, as has been done already in some states. Section 2. Difficulties of public control of industry. Number 1. The progress of industry is compelling greater social contact and more use of the agencies of government. The numerous exemplifications of this general statement have been met in the course of this study have a common cause. In simple conditions of industry, where most of the productive energies were given to securing the necessities of life, the struggle of man was with nature. Social relations then were simple and crude, such as those of chattel slavery. Now, most men get their livelihood from their bargains with other men. The relations of men with nature now are fewer and less close. The relations of men with men are more numerous and complex. Efficient cooperation is a factor in production. Right social relations are more essential to industry than a fertile soil. The social institutions of any community are its answer, expressed in human consciousness and in formal laws, to this difficult problem of living together. Laws and ways for regulating industry must be good or bad. The good laws are those in harmony with human nature, giving the best motives for work, and the greatest happiness in both the effort and its reward. The merit of laws, therefore, is relative to human nature. Those good for one kind of citizen may be bad for another. Men cannot be legislated into honesty without limit. The best that is possible is to enact laws that encourage the best in men as they are. A dishonest community neither has nor is capable of choosing men honest enough to supervise the others. Society cannot, by any amount of tugging and pulling on legislative bootstraps, lift itself above its own moral plane, but through the change in formal law cannot far proceed. It may lag behind and retard social progress. Law, tardily adjusted to social needs, tempts and corrupts men. A time has never been when a higher wisdom could not have been corrected some ancient grievance, have leveled some unmerited inequality, and by making laws as good as men were capable of administering at the moment, have freed their energies for further advances. It is only a spirit of moderate expectation that will not be cast down by the results of legal reforms. Hence, it cannot be hoped that abuses will not appear in the attempts to regulate private industry. Fallible men make mistakes and commit injustice, sometimes greater than that which they are seeking to prevent. Number 2, legislative interference with industry presents temptations to community selfishness to misuse social legislation. Community greed is not more lovely than individual greed. Many a citizen holds up a high standard for the public official and bewails the corruptions of politics when the legislator votes for his own interest instead of for his constituents' interest. Such a citizen rarely reflects that the responsibility for many legislative abuses comes back to the community individual voter. Can the water rise higher than its source? Is it a high conception of a representative's duty that he should outtalk, outwit, and outvote his fellow representatives to get a graft for the men who elect him? In many communities, the one public question of importance is tariff legislation in favor of local industries. This selfish issue bribes the electorate and blinds it and its legislators to every question of the general welfare. A great industrial commonwealth steeps its public life in corruption when its voters sell their political birthright for duty on iron. Many congressmen are so burdened with the task of securing some public expenditure in their district to help their constituents that they have little thought and less interest to give to larger public questions. If a local improvement will furnish labor and increase the value of surrounding property, though it is most uneconomic for the general community, the representative is expected to labor hard to secure it. Many citizens see little harm in log rolling by the legislator, that is, in his voting for a law without merit in order to get another law that his constituents want. The guilt of this worst form of bribery comes back to the community that forces its representative to such a course, sinking public morality to a lower level. Number 3, the power of the legislature to affect private fortunes presents strong temptations to public representatives. That the legislator is so often true to a high standard of public duty goes to illustrate the familiar truth that the individual moral code is better than that of communities. That some individuals betray their trust is less surprising. The credit mobilier scandal in connection with legislation in aid of the Union Pacific Railroad implicated many congressmen. A few years ago, in one of the greatest states, it was discovered that an innocent-looking bill related to the rights of property owners on streams practically involved a gift to a ring of men of $250 million worth of coal lands lying under the navigable streams and belonging to the state. Such temptations for wealth-getting are too great for men, selected solely for their ability to obtain offices and pensions for political supporters, and to secure class legislation for reputable citizens. The power of the legislative bodies to grant franchises and to permit the use of public property to corporations constantly gives opportunity for dishonesty and occasion for scandal in the larger cities. The histories of granting franchises in New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and many other municipalities are full of black pages. Public duties are too heavy for the public integrity. Industrial power has grown faster than the civic conscience, and somehow the balance must be made even. Number 4, the power of the courts and of executive officers in the interpreting and executing of laws governing business has become greater. With closer contact of man, there is greater friction in social relations, and litigation increases. Fortunes turn on the result of a civil suit. While juries are often corrupt, yet it is remarkable how well the courts have kept their integrity in the midst of great temptations. Professionals' pride and the noble traditions of the English judiciary strengthen the individual's character on the bench, not infrequently transforming a dishonest lawyer into a just judge. But popular elections, self-interest, and the social forces of wealth and ambition make the task at times too heavy. The executive branch of government is necessarily entrusted with great power, increasing with the extent of social regulation. The Secretary of the Treasury has discretion as to the sale and purchase of bonds, and thus can affect the rate of discounts and the selling price of securities. One man's decision, if known in advance, makes possible fortune for private pockets. A recognition of the importance of these facts, which are typical of a great class of facts, must help to develop a higher sense of public duty. Patriotism has been thought of too narrowly. The enemies of early society were outside its borders, and the citizen who traitorously gave them aid was held in abhorrence. Now, independently, in many quarters is voiced the conviction that the greatest enemies of society are within its borders, and that the political corruption is the modern form of treason. A higher conception of civic virtue is required to meet the added tasks of society. Public official control must be united with private industrial control in a way to present the fewest temptations to the betrayal of public trust. Now, as never before, must be felt the wisdom of Emerson's words. The best political economy is the care and culture of man. Section 3. Trend of policy as to public industrial activity. Number 1. There has been a large increase of state socialism in recent years. The term state socialism, broadly understood, includes all the forms of public participation in industry that have been passed in review. Ownership by towns, cities, state, or nation, laws regulating the freedom of contract, agencies to inspect conditions and to enforce the laws, commissions to supervise and control corporate industry. From every direction comes evidence of the increase of state socialism within the past 25 years. To those accustomed to think of the spirit of the Germanic races as that of individual liberty and enterprise, it seems remarkable that this increase has been greater among people of Teutonic origin, Germany, England, America, Australia, than those of the Latin race. The change seems to be a part of the movement of democracy, even the measures of Bismarck in Germany having been taken to ward off the demands of the radical party. The mere name of socialism no longer frightens the citizens of a free state, and when men of strong individualistic spirit even claim with pride that they are socialists, the meaning of that term is becoming very vague indeed. Number 2, state socialism must not be confused with collectivism or radical socialism. The word socialism is so variously defined that the earnest student sometimes despairs of getting a clear understanding of it. The thought of socialism ranges from the simplest form of state interference, such as the support of public schools and public fire departments, up to complete public ownership of all industry. It is well to describe as radical socialists those who would abolish private property and would strike at the very root of the existing order of society. The modern form of radical socialism originated among German thinkers of the school of Karl Marx, but it has many supporters in other lands. The typical radical socialist claims to possess the only pure brand of social reform, disdains any interest in state socialism, and scoffs at state control as mere temporizing, as not even a single step towards radical socialism. The typical state socialist agrees that these measures do not logically force him towards the extremer view. He is at heart an individualist, believing that the motive forces of society are in human character, not in governmental machinery, but he seeks to prevent some kinds of competition, to put other kinds on a better basis, to make the rules of the game fairer, but not to suppress it. According to this difference in ultimate plan, men and present measures can in general be classified. Yet one view sometimes shades into the other in the life history of a single individual. Believers in moderate interference sometimes move towards the extreme, and the most radical thinkers, sometimes with no less honesty, become, with broadening experience, more and more moderate. It would be surprising if anyone who is thinking and growing in social philosophy should succeed in so exactly adjusting to each other all his opinions as to be absolutely consistent at a particular moment in his views on social policy. Number 3, it is not safe to predict from present evidence a continued trend towards extreme social control. Social prophecy is fascinating. Men like to answer out of their ignorance the question, whither are we tending? A deeper study of social law should give this power, but it is not won by hasty generalization. Unripe social philosophers assume that because the theory of biological evolution is correct, The particular theory of social evolution which they choose to invent or accept is unimpeachable. Radical socialism is the exaggerated statement of a present social need. It is a bridging with hope, not with experience, of the chasm between reality and the dreams of the unsuccessful. It is true that many evidences point to an increase in social control for some time to come. The laws, the institutions, the prevailing morality of society have not kept pace with industrial growth in this period of sweeping change. What is seen, however, is a small arc of the curve of progress. Much of the social regulation in the Middle Ages was similar to that which is now increasing. Legislation by guilds and privileges of private corporation hedged industry about. A reaction against this in the 17th and 18th centuries brought on national and state control, and state interference of another kind rapidly increased until the time of Adam Smith. Then a strong reaction came, and the next period of 50 years saw far less of interference. The years from 1825 to 1840 were those of the greatest state socialism ever seen in America. But the results were so unfortunate that a violent reaction followed. The recent great increase of state activity is not likely to be continued indefinitely. The path of progress is a spiral. There are forces already at work, creating a resistance to any extension of this movement. Competition of the healthier sort cannot be suppressed without paralyzing results. Inequality and the opportunity for ability to realize itself cannot be destroyed. The social regulations must be of a sort to liberate the best energies of man, not to enchain them. If the evils of state regulation increasingly appear to outweigh the benefits, a limit must be put to the movement. While social control may aid in lifting production and competition to a higher and more moral plane, the ability of society will refuse to be ruled by the standard of the weak and inefficient. End of chapter 56.